following interview is with Pamela Young, author of Hope Street, which I'm sure should sell quite a few copies and hopefully become a bestseller because it deserved to be. The story is a true story about a family with a spiritual gift. Pamela has travelled here and overseas to visit many mysterious sacred sites and has a wealth of knowledge spiritually about what's happening today. In the show, Pamela talks about the voice, which she has heard since being a small child. The voice always spoke to her about the times we are living in now, with all the many disasters and things that are happening in the world. The voice also spoke about the work, the kind of work that people will be doing spiritually, maybe in the future. And connected to that idea is reincarnation. Pamela now realises what the voice was and what it was telling her and what the work actually is.
Hello and welcome to the SpiritGuides.co.uk network radio with your host Mark Chatterton. Tonight I would like to welcome to the show Pamela Young from Horwich in Lancashire. Pamela has just had her first book published called Hope Street. Pamela comes from a family of spiritualists, and the book tells her life story about growing up in this Lancashire town, as well as about her mother's unique spiritual gift as a trance medium. As you would expect in any family, there's plenty of ups and downs with one or two skeletons in the cupboard. Yet through all the adversity comes triumph, as they say. So a big welcome to you, Pamela.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay, this is your first book. Could you tell us a little bit about how you came to write the book?
Yes, well, about 5 years ago, when I was 57 and I had given up work, but I was sort of helping with family and elders and the grandchildren. But I started to have this very strong, compelling feeling to write about my mum and her mediumship and the messages that were told to us. But the messages were about 60 years ago and more, and there were things that we'd not heard of at the time. And I was a little girl, but I was told the story, and I was present at later sittings, and we were told things that were remarkable at the time we'd never heard of, and so we'd always really kept it secret. And then about 5 years ago, I just started to feel very strongly this compelling feeling, and I'd gone on a workshop, and it was after that I started to have dreams and unusual visions, and I was woken up about between 4 and 5 in the morning. I had to rush down and write. I couldn't use the computer then, so just writing very quickly. And it wasn't so much like automatic writing, it was more like it was there downloading, that had always been there, but I knew things. And this lasted for about 9 months, and it was the most beautiful, happy, high-energy feeling. And I just wrote and wrote thousands of words, and a lot of new material, as well as about my mum's story and family. And that's how it started, really, for 9 months. And then I just knew... I knew what to do, or who to write to, or it was just I just felt I was completely guided. But it wasn't only external guidance. It wasn't as though I was being made to do things or it was out of my control. It was just I knew what I had to do. And from going on that workshop and the writing for 9 months, I met someone from Ireland, and through someone I met on the workshop, and he was Aidan Stories, an angel therapist there, and I just felt this instant recognition and love, which is something that has happened throughout my life, but it's happening more and more now. And the spirit friends did tell us through my mum that this would happen during our lifetime, that we were like parts of groups, and we come back as a group, and when we meet, we recognise each other on a spiritual level. And then he then introduced me to Patricia Scanlon, who's an Irish author. She writes novels, but they're usually about people coming through adversity and being hurt and learning how to forgive. And she read the material, and she loved it, and with her it was this immediate love and joy at meeting, and I stayed with her for a week, and I just knew I'd been led all the way, and she bought me a book called The Secret History of the World by Jonathan Black. Real name is Mark Booth, and apparently, well, I know he's an editor, and he's the man that's publishing me now, but as soon as I read the introduction to this book, it was just a wonderful revelation, and I must have read the introduction 20 times. It's a very deep book. It's academic in that it's a lifetime of study, but it's lovely to read. And one day, and Patricia did say that she would, maybe contact him later, because she worked for Random. Her publishing house was Random. But within a couple of days, when I got back, I just again was waking up early in the morning. I just came down, and in that sort of same compelling, just wrote, and it just came. I didn't have to think what I was writing, and I sent it to him. And after I'd sent it, I read it and realised, it must have sounded really bizarre, but I've always trusted this compellingness, and it's never let me down, and I've had so many synchronicities happen, things that are just incredible, and it was just every day I would expect it, and it was almost like the joy of expecting it, and knowing I would be led on this amazing awakening, what I call it now. It seemed to ensure the happening of it. That's the only way I can describe it. And he kept the material, but at the time he was moving to another publishing house, so he had my material for almost 3 years, and I just kept absolute trust and faith that he was the one, even though there were one or two other choices through Patricia, and he stuck with me, and we became friends, and I went to London, I met him, and I told him all about the family history, and he was fascinated and felt that I had to start with the family history rather than start with a lot of stuff that he felt was perhaps a bit too deep, a bit too esoteric, because there's a lot to do with continuum of light and coming down, how we came down, how we choose to go back through experience, and I've got loads of stuff that we didn't use because he wanted me to establish my roots and talk about my childhood, the spiritualist childhood, as well as my mum's mediumship, and then my pilgrimage, and I learned a lot through adversity, and how in the last 5 years I feel I've awakened. It's more than the knowledge now. I can have the knowledge and the religious ethics or the philosophy or whatever, but I have this knowing about my spirit, my own spirit. It's not only external anymore, so.
The title of the book, Hope Street, refers to the street in which you were born and raised in the Lancashire town of Horwich, which is near Bolton. Can you tell us a little bit about what your childhood was like? Yeah.
Well, I suppose a lot of people's childhoods had below about them, but it just seemed magical. I was for 7 years there, and there was an optimism about it. I really think there was. I don't think that's just, rose-coloured specks. It was just after the war, and nearly everyone was employed and felt part of a society, part of a community, and it felt like a really new beginning to people, and that came across the way that they went to work, and there was lots of fun at work, and there was always jokes. they all had nicknames, and they'd come home from work, and the dads would come home and tell the stories, and it just sounded like, even though they worked hard, that there was a lot of camaraderie and a real sense of belonging. And of course, it was a time of the national health, and where people didn't have to pay anymore, didn't have to worry if they got poorly, and it was a really hopeful time. And where we live it's beautiful. It's just on the edge of the Pennine Moors, the West Pennine Moors. So 5 minutes we were up in what we used to call, well, it's Rivington, but we used to call it Rivy. And I just remember lovely times there with the family and kids when we'd all roam up, because, we'd go out with our jam butties and bottle of water and not have to worry very much, and we'd all go together in a gang, and there's things I remember. And the community, and nearly everybody went to some sort of church then, Sunday school, but we went to the Spiritualist church because as a child, my mum had communed with little spirit children. She'd always had the gift. Well, I suppose it happened to her when she was about 7, 8 or 9, around that age, and she used to actually play with little spirit children, a group of spirit children, and so she'd been led to the Spiritualist church as a child. She tried a few different religions, but she felt they were very accepting of her gift, and so we were members of the Spiritualist church as well, and it was lovely. We had the children's Sunday school was called the Lyceum, and the Lyceum was it was a Sunday school based on what a chap called Andrew Jackson Davis, who was one of the pioneer spiritualists in America, and he was a trance medium, and it was about 18. I should think about 1880. I'm not altogether. It's around about that time. He went into trance, and he started to talk about science that's only being discovered now. And it was before Ed Casey, and he could diagnose people's illnesses. But he also saw in the spirit world the children doing what we call calisthenics, and he brought all this which I suppose was the first aerobics, the first keep fit class, because it wasn't really what we did in the beginning of the 20th century. And he brought that back, and that it was formed on his visions from what children did in the spirit world. A lot had to do with colour and learning and just generally being kind and compassionate. But there was all this exercise into music, which was really good fun, and the adults joined in with the kids, and we'd march, and it was really good fun. But along with that, of course, there were the other services more for the adults, which was a clairvoyant service and healing services. And we used to have really good nights of, dancing or spot prizes, and lots of good fun in the evenings as well. It was your social life as well as your church, and that was general with all religions, quite a lot. I've forgotten what else.
Right, well, that's quite a lot, actually.
Yeah.
I was going to mention, because you mentioned your mother being one of the main people in the Spiritualist church, you've mentioned in the book that on occasions that a highly evolved spirit would speak through your mother, who you called the voice.
Yes.
What was important about what he said, and as a young girl attending these meetings, were you ever scared at all?
I was never, ever scared. And this is what saddens me a bit, because I know there's a lot of prejudice, and there's a the moment you say the word spiritualism, you can see a lot of people are being made to fear. And I've no doubt that, things might have happened to scare people, but I think the fear itself is the thing that scares people, because I never once felt any fear. My mother used to uh, she always had a gatekeeper. They called him my mind's gone now, the cobbler. And he didn't come through, but she always said he was there by her side, making sure that the right spirits came through. They used to call it coming through. And they were just absolutely lovely people. It was almost like having really nice relatives to visit you. And they were very kind, that very much different voices and different mannerisms, depending on who came. And there was a little core group that came, but when the voice came, I think it's difficult to distinguish. I've been told so many things by all the family, and they were so clear and repeated so often because it was such a marvellous home circle, really, that I'm not altogether sure at the age I first heard the voice, but we were always prepared. Miss Johnson was my mum's main guide, and she always came through my mum to start with, and she would prepare us, and she would ask us to keep our thoughts pure. Now, sometimes as I got into teens, that used to be a problem, because the minute somebody tells you that, you start thinking of all the things you shouldn't be thinking, all the naughty words and things. But anyway, that was just me as a kid. But it was always a wonderful feeling. It would take my mum a lot longer to go deep into her trance, and it was called the voice. I don't know what they meant by this, but they used to say he projected his voice rather than, like the other spirits were very present with us. He projected his voice because, I don't know whether we were ever told he was Jesus, but as far as I was concerned, it was Jesus, and I know as far as my mum was. So it was whether it was a person, whether it was an energy, I don't know, but it was the most beautiful feeling, and you actually felt the power and the compassion and the love when he came. And he often came with a blessing. It was often to bless us, touch our forehead, but other spirits would come before and talk about something called the work.
I was just about to mention that, actually,
Yeah.
because that is a quite an important theme that's in the book. Could you tell us what you mean by the work?
Well, they told us very simply in those days. I feel I've more of a sophisticated view on it now, but then all of us were told things very simply, that the work involved reincarnation. Now, I think anywhere in Britain in the late 40s, early 50s, 60 years ago and more, no one had heard of reincarnation. That was an entirely new concept to the sitters. And so it must have been quite amazing for them. I was a baby when they were first, or a young girl, very too small to be present. But it must have been quite an amazing concept. But the reincarnation was about coming to do the work. We were never, even when I got older and I heard more, we were never made to feel reincarnation was about karma. Don't ever remember that. Or learning from your mistakes, or, no doubt that is a consequence of reincarnation, but they always talked about it was purely for the work, that we'd come back to bring about the work. Now, the work would one day happen. That's all we knew. One day the work would happen. We looked forward to this. We're excited. But we were never told when. But certainly I believed it would be in my lifetime. And I'm now 62, and I'm absolutely convinced it will. And the work involved the world coming together in a twinkling of an eye. I remember that was just so imprinted on my mind. The worlds would come together in the twinkling of an eye. And I remember being told that it would run parallel with disasters, natural and man-made. But, I mean, as an adult now, I think, well, there's been disasters, there's disasters every year, but I got the impression that there would be more. But they didn't focus on the negative at all. It was very much about that we were all here to bring about this work. Now, at the time, I think the little circle, maybe thought it was just them, or at the time they were the only ones who knew about it. But, I now know it's everybody. The work is for everybody. The work that we're here to bring this about. And they're always impressed on our minds that the concept that thought is a living thing. I was absolutely I think I mentioned in the book, I joke about it probably being my first words, because that has always been with me. They impress me all the time. And my mother emphasised that with my growing up. Be very careful with your thoughts. They are living things. Whatever you think will manifest. Well, they didn't use the word manifest. Whatever you think will happen. And don't try not to think harmful thoughts or think bad thoughts about people. And whatever you think will come back to you. And, of course, they were also big socialists then. Spiritualism and socialism seemed to go hand in hand. It was progressive, it was universal, which was, the Labour government had got in after the war, and, this idea of community and people having rights and unions. I know unions are a bad name now a lot of the time, but without them, we wouldn't have paid holidays and all the rights we have now. So it was a very positive thing, to be very careful how we think and to feel ourselves as it was brotherhood then, brotherhood, sisterhood, and underneath all our differences, we are all spirit, and so it was very much that. I'm sure I'm not remembering all that I should right now, but thought is a living thing was really very important, and that the worlds would come together in the twinkling of an eye. And in the last 5 years, I feel I've had a lot more insight into that, because all through my growing up and my teens and my 20s, even though I was, too busy, often making a bit of a mess of my life, it was always there with me that the work would happen. And no matter what, I've been selfish. I prayed when I was, 20s and 30s, praying for what I want, but I've always prayed. But, now I don't ask anymore. I just try and give thanks for all the blessings. And I just know we're all one, and I know that we are constantly guided. I think we have not just one guide. I think we have a whole team looking after us all the time. But now I believe that they're looking after us in order to help us to find ourselves, to become aware of the spirits we are, more than maybe getting clairvoyance or messages. I know they're a great comfort to people, and I'm not denying that. But I really think at this time now, the work is about us being conscious of our consciousness, standing above ourselves and seeing what our thoughts are like, what patterns we've still got, what we really need to work on. Because underneath all the baggage we've picked up, and the hurts and the joys and the cultural stuff and the prejudices, underneath that we are pure spirit here to become self-aware. I'm absolutely convinced. And I think once and there's a huge awakening going on now. I mean, throughout the world, it seems that the more we've done away with dogma and organised religion, though it's still lovely to have shared worship, people are looking for it inside of themselves, and I'm sure that's what we have to do, and we find it. This amazing spirit that's within us, this little voice that we hear, and a lot of the time we ignore. And I'm sure everybody listening will have known that there's had times when you've heard no, and you still do it, and then if you start to listen and really discipline yourself to go along with it, it's amazing how we're led by our own spirit in partnership with all the angel and spirit guides that help us to awaken.
All right, thank you for that, Pamela. Obviously, there's a lot in the book about your own life and all the things that you've done. And you mentioned that you got married at the age of 17, you moved down south, and then your marriage broke up, but you had 2 young children. Yeah. And then you describe in the book that you went through what some people would call the dark night of the soul, where you describe undergoing something like a near-death experience. Can you explain to the listeners what this was like and how it changed you?
Yeah. Well, my children had gone away with the dad. And like, most single parents, you really look forward to it, and when they've gone, you're sort of a bit at a loss. I had a great friend who I used to spend time with, and she and I used to do things together, and she wasn't around, and my love life was in a bit of a mess. And I just felt very alone. And in fact, when I think about this time now, I can still feel emotional because it was so powerful. I could never have committed suicide because I'm a very optimistic, happy person. But that night, I just felt hopeless. I felt I'd made a mess, and I felt lost. And I went and I lay down the bed. Now, I didn't fall asleep, but what happened, I suppose, is what they call it, a change in awareness or consciousness. I just felt I felt myself just start to sink, and I was going down and down and down into the darkness. And as I went, I was aware of other people's pain there. And I felt very sick, very poorly, and really, really unwell, more unwell than I've ever felt ever. And as I got, and it took me quite a long time, I was still going down and it was dark, and as I got feeling as bad as I could feel, I just slowly, very, very slowly started to rise. And it was really slow though, but as I came up, and I was on like is it horizontal? Oh no, it's not. No, I'm on like a slant coming up until I did start coming horizontally. And as the higher I got, the less poorly I felt. And it was quite a long time. I was going along the darkness, like still dark, but not painful like it had been, not oppressive, and I couldn't feel other people's pain either. And then, way in the distance, I just saw this little speck of light, and I was just being magnetically drawn to it, slowly but just slightly floating along, going tiny bit faster all the time, until the nearer I got to it, the light became bigger and bigger, until I felt like I was in a tunnel, because the light was round and bigger. And the nearer I got to this light, and words will never, ever be able to express the feeling. It was magnetic, it was pulling me, and as I got into the light, I say it enveloped me, but it wasn't just enveloping me. I was that light. It was the most, probably the nearest, the love I had for my children was probably the most unconditional love I'd had. For my children, for my mom, and it was it was thousands times more than that. But when I was in that light, I was just bathing in it. I was it. I was not separate from it. And what was the most remarkable feeling I had was that for me to feel anything worthy here on earth was when I was loved or loving my kids, when other people loved me, especially, if I was in a relationship, I only felt worthy if I felt loved by them, and I had a lot of romantic notions. I was always searching for the big love, and and the high that it gave you, and that if it ever went wrong, then I would just fall again, and I depended on others to make me feel like worthy or a person or alive. And in this place, I didn't need that. But it wasn't a selfish love. I was just love. So I wasn't separate from it. I didn't always need to be asking for it or searching for it and trying to find it. I was it. I was the thing in itself. And so it made me love everything. It was just a universal, the most wonderful love I've ever known. And I know when I die, I don't want to go yet because I've got lovely grandchildren and a lovely husband and things I want to do, but I have no fear of going to the other side. And it was just beautiful. And what surprised me when I did come back was that when in that state, I didn't want to come back. And that surprised me when I got back in my body, but it didn't seem to matter what went on here or what was it didn't seem real here. What was real was what was over there and what I was, this light and this love. But just as I was settling in, just lying there enjoying it, this man appeared, and he was a giant of a man. He stood so tall, and he was in the most beautiful, shining, white, long robe. Now, for me, he was Jesus. And I think he was Jesus for me because Jesus was everything to me, even though we were brought up as spiritualists, culturally and in every way. And my mum had always talked about Jesus being the head of the work. So he was Jesus for me, but he didn't speak. But I knew him immediately. When I talk about recognizing people here, this instant recognition, as though we are on a oneness. With him, it was just pure oneness, and he loved me, and I loved him, and I knew him, and he knew me, knew everything, and he just gave me the most. In his eyes, looked at me, and it was the most compassionate feeling. But he just lifted his hand, and he pointed his finger back, and it had taken me ages to get there, and within like a split second, I was back on the bed. And he'd sent me back with such love and compassion, but I had to come back. And I laid on the bed, and I really felt like I'd died. I was a bit in a cold sweat. I felt shaky, and I did feel a bit unwell, like I'd shocked back, But it changed I'd had the knowledge before as spirit. I was lucky not to have any dogma as a kid. It was all God is love, and you've got your little spirit friends, and I had a wonderful bringing up. I wasn't forced into anything. It was just a lovely, lovely sort of bringing up with spirit guides and all that. But instead of it being information anymore, I just knew. I just had experienced it. And I read a few years ago that Carl Jung said, I don't believe in God anymore. I know God. And I knew spirit. I knew, I always think of God as love. So I'm like my generation and a lot of people. I do find, because we've been brought up to call God this masculine person. And so I don't find it as easy to say God as I used to. But if God is love, and pure spirit and whatever we call it. I experienced it, and I know that's what we all are. And it was exquisite. And I knew from then that I could heal. And that's when things started to change. My life started to change. And within a short time, I was back up north. And I was back up here with the family and working again with my mum spiritually. It changed me totally.
Yes, because you say in the book, obviously, after that experience, you moved back up north to Horwich.
Yeah.
And I'd like to ask you quickly about the Rivington Pike, which you mentioned, because Horwich is obviously on the edge of the Pennine Hills.
Yeah.
And the hill seems to feature a lot in your book.
Yeah.
And I read that you all went up there for the harmonic convergence in August 1987.
Yeah.
What is it about Rivington that you find so special?
Well, it's something about, it's in me from a child. I mean, from my first views of when I was little, wherever you go in Horwich, you can more or less see this beautiful beacon. And it's a beautiful shape, and it's a breast shape, and on the top it's got this building that, it does look like a beautiful feminine breast overlooking and protecting Horwich. It's always had this huge power for me, and it features a lot in my life, as I mentioned in the book. And whenever I've been away and I'm coming along the motorway and there I see it, it's coming home. And it's I suppose it's what we all feel about nature, the mother in nature. It's very protective and beautiful, and it's very symbolic too. And I know in maybe 100 years or so, that they would climb the every Good Friday, the mill workers or whatever work they did would get Good Friday off because it was such a religious day. They didn't get many more days off, and they would climb it as Jesus climbed. And carried his cross, and they would walk around it, and it still happens today on Good Friday. Maybe a lot of the young people don't know why they're doing it. Everybody goes up Rivington on a Good Friday, but now there's stores and selling food and little sideshows, and it's everybody has a lot of fun. But it was a religious pilgrimage, so it's built. I think it's built power over time, and as well as it just being a natural, a beacon that just gives. I've always felt it gives hope. There's something very special about the area around here, and I suppose where anybody lives and they've got that sort of relationship with nature, it's in my blood.
Yeah,
and that time we went. Sorry, time we went up. It was. It all over the world. I think people were meeting and climbing hills. I know a Glastonbury tour, and at the moment I just can't think of the places. But wherever people could climb to a hill, they climbed and sent their thoughts out for peace. And I know it was to do with the planetary alignment. But we climbed it just as a group of 7, and my mum did a little ceremony as the sun came up, just prayer for peace and love, and that, we'd all realise why we're here. Very simple. My mum's philosophy was very simple and very loving, and it was a lovely day, and it was great to feel that we were joining others around the world doing the same. And that was the start of the New Age, really, I think. When you had George Trevelyan and people like that, and the Recon Trust, and a lot's happened since then, and it's really taken off. And I'll always be really grateful to Spiritualism because, they were a springboard for a lot of people who are doing New Age things now. And especially the healing really spread now, and it was people in the spiritualist movement like Harry Edwards that got it going, it taking healing into hospitals, because it wasn't allowed, in the 40s. And so I've forgotten the question now.
Yeah, I was going to mention, because obviously you said it was like a bit of a pilgrimage going up there.
Yeah.
You say in the book in 1996 you made a special visit to America where you visited several Native American spiritual sites.
Yeah.
What made this visit so special for you?
Well, spiritualism, and a lot of spiritualism, and I know it was sometimes seen as a joke, because everybody had an Indian guide, they called Native Americans then. But I really do believe that what happened to, the whole of nearly all the Native American culture and their religion and everything, when the white man started going over and there was the gold rush and the land rush, and it just annihilated the Native American way of life, and they'd really live with the land. I know, they lived in small groups and tribes, but it was a peaceful place. It's a huge country, and their life was very intuitive, very living with the Great Spirit. Whatever they did, they gave thanks for, and they were led intuitively by Spirit. And so that was all annihilated. There was people coming from every continent to America, and it was a great melting pot for ideas and philosophies that might have come later. That I believe that all the people who passed away, and there were thousands, came back to help the people, because nearly everybody started they say it started with the Fox sisters tapping and finding there was an intelligence tap back in America. They say spiritualism started from that, but actually it started before, when people started to go into trance states after Mesmer and people like him started taking people within, and that's how spiritualism came up. But there were a lot of Native American souls and shamans coming back through mediums to help us, I think, understand the relationship between us and the spirit world. And because they'd passed en masse and so quickly and in such a short time, I think they were able to help us. I've always, from being a child, had this huge affinity with Native American souls. But I also had an experience once in, it was something called the Christos experience that came from Australia, and we did it as a group, and I felt very safe, but I did experience being a Native American woman. And I was standing by, this was before we went in 96, we were standing by, I was standing by a river, I was getting the water, and I never felt so sad, because in my normal consciousness of Pamela, I used to blame the white men for what they'd done. But when I was this woman in this altered state, this Native American woman, I was holding my baby boy, and the sadness was not what other people had done to us, but what our own men had done by starting to drink. And it was, that was a completely new idea to me. So, I felt that wasn't my imagination, that was a real experience. So when I got the chance to go in 96, it was for two reasons. We'd heard people coming from America. We used to go over to Leeds University, and they had a UFO conference every year. And various people had come from America, and they were talking about this conference that was going on called the Star Nation Conference. And I just thought, I've got to go to that, and I've got to visit South Dakota after the conference. So Simon and I did this, and it was the most amazing pilgrimage. I mean, first of all, the Star Nation conference with the indigenous peoples. They're starting to refine their beliefs, their culture, their healings, and shamanism, because it was prevented. The children were not allowed to speak their language. They were put into boarding schools. They weren't allowed to see the parents quite very often. And so it had been outlawed. They hadn't been able to practice any of their wonderful healings and so on. So they were starting to refine it, and so they would talk to us, and about what they were doing, how they were trying to find respect again for the culture, which had, they'd lost the infrastructure and everything. And then we had people like John Mack. I don't know if you've heard of him. He was this amazing academic and professor at Harvard University. And he was getting more and more people who had been abducted. But he never said this is happening out there. What he thought was there was some change in consciousness going on. And he was a fascinating man. And he talked that day about changes in consciousness. And he worked with the indigenous people. He worked with the Native American people on refinding what this deep consciousness that we all have. And I've read quite a few of his books. He's died now, unfortunately. He was knocked over in London about 5 years ago. But he really put his head on the line, because he was a very respected psychiatrist at Harvard. And when he started writing about these things, what people felt were abductions, that he felt it was a lot deeper than that. He had to go to court, and he lost a lot of friends, and in the academic circle they tried to get rid of him. But he went to go to court to have the rights to sorry, I've got a bit lost here. The rights to develop these things and to understand what might be going on, and he won, and he stayed at Harvard, and but from then, and we heard about all the myths and the stories that had been brought forth, and a lot of the Native American people believed that they had come from the stars, and that's why it was called the Star Nation. And so from then, we then travelled South Dakota, and the Black Hills are just wonderful. If anybody can afford to go and have time there, it's absolutely beautiful. And there's a lake there called Sylvan Lake, and I write about it in the book. That was so powerful. And Bear Butte, a mountain that we climbed in silence, because it was like walking in. It would be, you wouldn't go shouting and screaming in a cathedral, and you walk there in pure silence because it is so sacred. And it's where people had their vision quests, and we just went to some wonderful places, and then we went to somewhere called Mateo Tepe, which was named Devil's Tower, but it isn't really Devil's Tower, but after, Third Encounters film. That's where it was filmed, and that I couldn't believe that. An amazing place. And the geological reasons for it, but even knowing that this thing's just come up from the ground, this rock, it's still, you feel the spirit in the land. And I do believe that the Native American people are still there, helping us to awaken, to use our reason to choose the oneness and the love of nature and the mother and the Father, to be at one with the land, and whatever we do to each other or to the land, we do to ourselves. And I think they're there helping us to make that choice. But we have to get rid of all our things that held us back to find that, and then to choose it, so that we go from intuitive to experience, to choosing the path which they lived naturally. And I think one day when we're coming there, I think there's a huge movement to make a better world. For all we see, that goes on in the news, and we're made to fear a lot. The majority of people are good and kind and loving and want to live in peace. And I think we're awakening more to that.
Right, I'm going to have to wind up the interview now, but I've got one final question for you, Pamela. You mentioned towards the end of the book about a place called Gorton Priory in Manchester.
Gorton Monastery, yes.
You've obviously got a connection there. Could you tell us a little bit about this place and how that's developed over the years?
Yes. Well, Gorton Monastery, after the Reformation, then the Catholics came back, the Franciscan brothers came, and they built this huge monastery. Well, it's called a monastery. It was really a church and a friary, but it's been named the monastery because they wore the habits, and but it was to make a statement that the Catholics were back, and I think it might be bigger than the parish church in Manchester, but in '89 it was the brothers had to let it go. All the parishioners had left after 120 years, had moved away, and they couldn't afford it to keep it going, and they had to sell it, and they sold it to property developers who then went bankrupt and had sold a lot of the artifacts off and cleared off, and then it just became derelict. But it was a listed building, so for years it had been letting the rain in. It was derelict and just full of pigeons. And the pigeons, it was a big toilet for them, and one day Paul Griffiths was going along the train, and he'd been an altar boy there as a child, and he felt very sad. Took his wife along, Elaine Griffiths, and she said, "We have to do something." It became her mission. She bought it for £1, and then she spent the next, she spent the last 15 years having to get lottery funds and match funds and worked really hard with a small team, and it's rebuilt with about £7 million. But it's deconsecrated. But now it's still got the power and the beauty and the healing. But now it's for any events. They have weddings there, people have training there, mind, body, spirit. But it's for events, and always on a Sunday it's open to the public 12 to 4. But I heard about this about 3 years ago from a friend, and I was just inspired by the story, and I rang up. And this guy answered, and he said, "If you feel that compelled to come now." And it was Mother's Day, and so we went in. And the minute I walked in there, I said to Simon, I was just knocked over by the power and the love, and I said, "This is where the work will start." And we did a little ceremony by Mary's altar that, even though it's deconsecrated, we took yellow roses, and straight away I volunteered. Both Simon and I volunteered to work there. And then about 18 months ago, a relative came from Ireland, and she only came for tea, but she ended up staying nearly a week because she brought the family tree, and we were just bowled over because I knew my great-granddad had come from Ireland. I knew he'd lived in Horwich, and I thought he'd gone from Horwich as a sailor to the Cape, where he met my great-grandma, who he brought back, who was mixed race, black African, and her father was white Dutch, colonial, and she was the first black woman in Horwich. I knew those things, but what I didn't know was that, in fact, my great-granddad was living in Gorton before he came to Horwich, and he and his dad, are like all the kids in the Catholic community there, helped build a monastery. So that there's been synchronicities and things given to me throughout the last 5 years of writing about this, and I know it's because it's the time for the message to be shared. And I just think when we all look into our own history, and the more we search, the more we'll be given, and we're given these amazing little gems and synchronicities, and it becomes a shining path. And I believe the more awake we are, the more we get into this energy that I call it synchronistic light. And when people talk now about the law of attraction and all that, I believe it's an energy that happens to us when we start to awaken who and what we are, and then spirit can create with us. It's like you join this path then. I'm not really describing it well, but that's happened to me all along, and I know the message is to be shared. And it just happens that, my life story might make for interesting reading, but the real thing about this book is for the message about who and what we are, and I'm just full of it, and it's just a lovely feeling once we become aware of it. Have I answered your question?
Yeah, it's been fascinating talking to you, Pamela. Certainly learnt a lot, and obviously you've had some very special experiences in your life. So if anyone's interested, you can get the book called Hope Street. It's published by Coronet Books and is available in bookshops as from next week.
I think it's the 20th it comes out.
20th of January, that's right. Yeah. So thank you very much, Pamela, for sharing a part of your story, but obviously it's well worth reading the book to find out more. And thank you for your time and speaking to us tonight.
Well, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you.